Hi, my name is Rachel Clare, and I am a storyteller, photographer, and writer. When I was growing up, I loved books, I loved films, and my parents were certain that I was going to become an author or a writer to some sense, and it is the main reason I went to university and studied journalism. But I fell in love with photography, and I fell in love with creating images, and when I realized the reason why I loved creating images was because I loved the stories behind them and recognized that I could combine my two loves of photography and writing to do one thing. Storytelling almost just made complete sense. It was always just a hobby. It was something that I always just did on the side while I was doing other things, and somehow over the years I almost just fell into it just by doing the things that I loved and by doing the things I liked. After a while, I found that I was doing it more and more until I was almost doing it full time. So I work as a photographer and a writer synonymously, and I find that they blend into each other. Somehow, I ended up with what was essentially my dream career without even really pushing myself into it. It was just by networking and working with the right people. I feel like storytelling is so important. It's something that people almost consider, they connect storytelling with like bedtime stories and kids, but they don't realize that so much of what we see in our everyday lives is storytelling. You know, people tell stories to evoke emotion from people, to create change, to push people in the direction that they want them to go in. Stories have this huge ability to inspire us and to make such a massive difference in people's lives. They're an escapism. They let us jump out of our everyday lives and into somebody else's, and that means that we're creating something that people can connect with. I started in photography when I was about 18 years old. My parents bought me my first digital SLR, but it was really the inspiration from my grandfather that really pushed me to build a career from it. So my grandfather is a war historian and photographer and taught me how to use my camera properly. He takes beautiful portraits, takes beautiful photos, and has all this really old photographic equipment. He has, really, really old photos of our family and, of the military. The first big overseas trip I ever did was with my granddad. He took me to Libya and Egypt, which at the time were just on the brink of a revolution, and it was a really intense trip for me, and I was only 19 at the time, so I learnt a lot from it. When I first started as a photographer, I was dead set on being a fashion photographer. After a while, I began to fall out of love with the industry. I began to see how intense of an impact it had on the young girls that I was photographing, and I think I had this moment. I just couldn't believe that we were building up girls to believe that they had to look a certain way and that they couldn't just be themselves and be who they were. I just sort of fell out of love, and I couldn't find a happy medium. So I couldn't find some way to still photograph fashion, photograph people without being involved in this industry that I believed was tearing women down. So I just left it behind. And I knew that if I ever went back into photography again, that I'd have to do something completely contrasting. So I sort of did a 180 and decided to photograph something completely different, and I ended up in travel. It started with a trip to America. I actually still remember the first photo I ever posted on my new Instagram as field notes. I was riding a bike from Hermosa Beach to Santa Monica, and I was with my brother, and I made him stop so that I could take a photo of these two deck chairs that were outside somebody's property. And when I got back to the hostel, I popped him up on my Instagram, and they just got like a massive response, and it was like a brand new Instagram, and I was like, well, where did this come from? I don't know what just happened. That's how Field Notes started. It was the same America trip that I ended up purchasing a couple of cool adventure products that I really loved. And I went hiking in Oregon when I took a photo of this bottle. And I remember just waking up, my Instagram had just gone crazy. Back in the days where if you were, working with a company or posting photos of their brand, your Instagram grew very quickly. And yet this company, because of this, had actually reached out to me and said to me hey, we really like these photos. Do you think you could take a couple more shots of our gear while you're traveling? And I was like, wow, this is cool. Just by doing something that I loved and working with people that I loved, I'm getting work doing something that actually inspires and fulfills me. That's how I became very adventure and travel orientated. And now begins the process of trying to find the happy balance between bringing some of that fashion and portraiture back into it, as well as still posting all of that travel stuff as well. I have worked with film before. I really enjoyed it, but I was kind of photographing before I really knew the full capabilities of what I was doing. So when I was shooting analog, I didn't really know what I was doing and how to shoot on it, but it definitely played a massive part, I think, in furthering my creativity. I loved photographing on expired film and I loved light leaks. I learned from analog not to think of the perfect image as being the final product, that sometimes when things went wrong, they actually created something so much cooler. And it really taught me how to work with what you're given. And it's the same with working on digital and working with equipment that's not always been top of the range. I've always kind of been a little bit behind everyone else in terms of my equipment. But what that means is that when I'm photographing, I really have to think outside of the box. I really have to, look at what equipment I've got and say, all right, I've only got a 50mm lens. I want to get this shot. I have to climb over all these rocks and through this bush to get there, but I'm gonna make it work. I'm going to make this shot happen because it's in my head. And I think because of that, I've almost learned that I can pretty much make absolutely anything happen that I want to happen as long as I'm determined to make it happen. My equipment and what I'm using never determines what I'm able to achieve. I believe that everybody has the potential to look incredible in photos as long as they feel comfortable and respected by the person taking that photo. Like so many photographers, I am looking for people who are interesting to look at. It doesn't necessarily mean the idealistic version of what, society perceives to be beautiful. It just means somebody might have really big blue eyes, or they might have cool, crazy hair, or they might have something about them. Sometimes it's even just someone's personality. It's not even the way they look. They just have this persona about them that just shines through photographs. And that's why I sometimes feel like having a story to tell with words and images creates so much more of a picture for people, is because it's not just the way people look, it's the way they act and feel that shows in the images too. You can draw inspiration from everything around you. Sometimes I find that when I'm at home, I'm so uninspired, and the moment I'm on the road, I'm just surrounded by ideas. There's so much to do and so much to see and so much to create. But I often find as well that one of the greatest things about traveling and photographing is coming home. You're just living off this adrenaline and you're just pushing yourself and pushing yourself. It's almost so nice to come home and realize that you're so supported. Perth and Western Australia, hands down, it is my favorite place in the entire world. I believe that even if I wasn't from here, it would still be one of my favorite places in the world, especially, Western Australia as a whole, because of its diversity. You almost get to be a pioneer in Perth at something. There's so many firsts waiting to happen somewhere like Perth. We are quite a new city. Being a creative and being a photographer in Western Australia and in Perth means that you really kind of get to control what you want to do. You get to pioneer things. You get to really shake it up without the overhanging feeling that somebody may have done this before you. You really get to kind of push and do new things. One of the questions that I ask myself over and over again as a photographer, or even just as a creative in no matter what I'm working on, is how am I making a difference? Whenever I'm sharing something and I'm putting words with it and I'm telling these stories, I'm always trying to think, what will people get from this? Whether it makes them happy, maybe it makes them laugh, maybe it makes them smile, or maybe they just say hey, I can relate to that. For me, I'm just trying to make people feel something and relate to it in some way or another. I want people to feel inspired to be able to create their own work. I want them to feel inspired to go out there and explore, to start new conversations, to talk to people. I want them to jump outside of their comfort zones and do something that they wouldn't do before. But doing that through images means that it can sometimes be a little bit of trial and error. You want to tell this story and maybe people don't connect with it. And over the years, I've learned that the best way to connect with somebody is to just be as honest as you possibly can. And whenever I'm writing and whenever I'm putting something up and whenever I'm photographing, I am always making sure that whatever it is I'm talking about, I've actually sat there and thought about it and connected with it before I push it out to everybody else. I have to feel it myself, because if I don't feel it myself, I find it really difficult to tell that story. And if I'm telling a story and it's inspiring someone else, or it's empowering somebody else, or it's helping somebody in some way, or pushing somebody to make change or difference, then yeah, that's what I want to be doing.